Greetings, everyone. This is the Hipster Snek, and today I wanted to do something a little out of the ordinary. You see, it didn't actually occur to me that August of this year, 2024, is the 10th anniversary of Five Nights at Freddy's. Now, some of you might be going, Snek, you definitely knew. Wednesday's upload was literally an entire podcast of you like gushing about your relationship with the franchise. Yeah, would you guys believe that's completely a coincidence? I literally did not plan that. That's just how it went. True story. So, I tried playing 5 Laps at Freddy's, and I can't use my recording footage because it kept crashing every time I tried to play Midnight Motorist. So that sucks because that was the track I was really excited for. It's not short version. The demo's not very good. They're gonna have to do a lot to get it where fans will actually pay money for it. They would basically need to include like an online multiplayer mode. They would need to fix the character class system, and then they would just need to like fix everything. The controls are weird. The game crashes a lot, and apparently the pit track is actually worse bug wise. Anyway, I'm not here to get negative. I'm gonna do a little bit of unscripted book talks. Because, you see, this past year, for my Snekiversary, a friend got me the first 4 Fazbear's Frights light novels. Well, not light novels. They got the first 4 novels. Short novels, I should say. And yes, there is a difference for people who are curious. Now, I've read the Silver Ice trilogy. It was weird, but okay. So I wasn't really sure what to get into because I heard the Fazbear's Frights were kind of like their own thing. I also heard they really varied in quality, which is true, and I'll get to that. But I was like, you know what? I'm a big FNAF head, and getting to read this was actually kind of a lot of fun. With its ups and downs. So I figured, you know what, I'm going to talk about the first 4 books, of which there are, I believe, 12 in the Fazbear's Fright series, and then it switches over to the Tales from the Pizzaplex, where it basically follows the same trajectory, but instead it does it from Security Breach and Help Wanted. So the very first book is called Into the Pit, which is where the game Into the Pit derives its story and scenario from. Now, each book actually has 3 short stories each, and then a 4th overarching story that links it all together. So these are short stories in their own kind of little universe. And there does appear to be continuity between them because of the overarching story at the end of each book, but I've literally only done the first third, so I don't know exactly how everything is going to come together. So let's just get into it. Let's just kind of do a breakdown. There's going to be spoilers. Spoiler alert, if you're still planning to read the books and for some reason haven't, why haven't you? These have been out for a while. Anyway, the first story is Into the Pit, and it's a great way to launch into the books. It's actually one of the best stories in these short novels, and I think it was a great one to choose to adapt into a game. The whole thing revolves around Oswald, the young boy living in this kind of this town that's really downsized in recent years with the closure of a nearby steel mill. And his dad had to change jobs, and his mom works a really difficult shift as a nurse. And he ends up going to this place called Jeff's Pizza. And in the back of Jeff's Pizza, there's a ball pit. And he's like, oh, you know, it'd be funny if I, like, climbed in and scared my dad. So he climbs into the ball pit, but when he emerges, he's in Freddy Fazbear's Pizza circa 1985. And he's like, dude, this is super cool. And so he kind of starts, like, time jumping through the ball pit and like hanging out with these kids in 1985, and which is like when his dad would have been a kid. It's really cool. I like the way they do the build up. It's really a fun story, and there's some pretty good jokes. Like they were trying to ask him like what movies he had seen recently, and the only one he can think of from the early 80s is E.T., which came out like 2 or 3 years before. And they're just like, oh, that movie's ancient. What are you talking about? And he's like, yeah, you have no idea. And so then the thing I think that makes this really work is the villain is never explained. it's a Spring Bonnie costume with like some implication it might be Springtrap, but like it's never said. It doesn't talk. It doesn't address. It's never addressed by name. It's just kind of like the Yellow Rabbit character, the entire book, and that's it. That's all you get. uh, so we don't know what it is. Like, is it a ghost? Is it in Oswald's head? Is it real? It's almost certainly real because Oswald is the narrator, and in this context, he has no reason to lie. But I think it's really good because it does that kind of mind screw thing. And mind you, I do want to clarify, this is kind of like Goosebumps with a FNAF coat of paint. So, like, these are not complicated stories. I say good, I mean it good in the sense of this is a novel for, like, maybe older kids, younger teens, the primary FNAF demographic. I'm way, way older than what's expected to actually be reading these. So when I say good, I do mean it in kind of a comparative sense. But I would say Into the Pit is unambiguously a good story. If this was like if there's a reason to pick up the first book, Into the Pit is worth it. And like I said, there's going to be spoilers. Oswald survives, and the weird yellow rabbit mascot character kind of gets hoisted on its own petard in its own way. But here's the thing: when I finished Into the Pit, I was like, "Oh, okay, that's how it's going to be. That's status quo. Everyone's going to get off scot-free. Everyone's going to be safe. It's going to be just fine. Like, no one's actually going to get hurt. No one is ever actually going to lose. The good guys will win. The bad guys lose. That's how it's going to be. So the next story is To Be Beautiful. And that was a very cruel 1-2 combo, whoever wrote this. Ellie Cooper. I have the book here in my hand. And so, like, okay, so this story picks up with a high school girl, someone who's like kind of a bit older than Oswald. And her whole thing is like she cannot stop trash talking herself, which is hashtag relatable. She just gives herself so much crap, and she's like she hates everything, and she complains about her nose, she complains about her eyes, her arms, she's chubby, all this other stuff. She hates everything about herself. And she's like obsessed with like this really preppy cheerleader-esque group of girls, and she calls the Perfects. And she's like, oh man, if I was like them, I would be, cool and popular, and not aware of just how transient that status really is, especially in high school of all places. I know if you're in high school right now, maybe you don't believe me, but like you have no idea how very quickly you'll find that leg of your life is a footnote, and how little it actually impacts the rest of your life. That's your friendly Snek pep talk for the moment. So she's just trash talking herself this entire time. I feel really bad for her. She tries to dye her hair. She messes it up and like turns her hair like this. I think they call it like sewage green or something like that. It's awful. Like the way they describe it is pretty funny. I felt bad, but it was still like kind of funny. So then, on her way home from school, she passes this construction site, and apparently kids are just like allowed to walk. That was not a thing where I grew up. Like you had to ride the bus or like have a ride or something. Like, you were not allowed to walk to school without very special permissions, and it only would be for people who were extremely nearby. That said, she sees something sticking out of a car parked on this construction site, and when she pulls on the thing sticking out, it's a full human-sized animatronic, and she just like takes it. This is like the one part of the story I don't understand, where it's like she gets a fixation with it, and she's like, oh, it's beautiful, it's slender, its skin is perfect, so it has like that metallic or like maybe a porcelain doll quality to it. So she kind of becomes enamored with it. And she takes it home. She kind of cleans it up, but she's not a roboticist or anything. She can't really fix it, but it springs to life anyway, and it introduces itself as Eleanor. And Eleanor's whole thing is like, oh, like I want to grant whatever wish you have in mind because you saved me, so I can do that much for you. And so Sarah's just like, yeah, I want to be beautiful, and she gets more specific, and she's like, oh, I think she starts off with her hands. And Eleanor's like, okay, well, there's two conditions. You're going to wear this necklace I made for you, and you have to let me sing you to sleep at night. Which Sarah is basically okay with, and she doesn't she doesn't ask any questions. If she asked any questions, the story would have ended right then and there. Like, no questions whatsoever. She's just so happy that Eleanor is very strongly implying that this is something she can do. So Sarah wakes up, and of course, like, she has these long, slender fingers and these beautiful, like, flawless skin on her arms, and she's just like as happy as can be. She is just ecstatic, and of course, like, as each night goes on, she's like, "Oh, I want perfect legs. I want a perfect stomach. I don't want to be chubby anymore." And she's like, "I hate my nose. Fix my nose." And like piece by piece, she's waking up, and her body is completely different. And and again, she's not asking any questions. At no point is she panicking. She is just super stoked this is happening, and she's okay with it. I'm like, you really think that at some point, like, okay, maybe the first time she's like so giddy she doesn't think to question it, but like after some point she really should have questioned it, because she gets her wish and she starts hanging out with the perfects, and then she kind of starts seeing how imperfect they are. And she starts squabbling with her best friend who doesn't care about fashion or glamour or anything like that. And she has a falling out with someone who is actually her friend. She starts hanging out with these people who are shallow and superficial. They are not her friends. So these weird, kind of annoying harpies that she just hanging around because she had this perception that they were somehow perfect. And at some point, like at the very end, she slips on the floor at her cafeteria at school, and the necklace comes off, and the illusion is undone. And she looks down, and like metal and the hubcaps and scraps are like bulging out of her body, and she's like rusting and literally just falling apart. It's actually pretty visceral the way they describe it. And so she like runs home trying to get to Eleanor to ask what's happening. Eleanor's gone, because of course. After exploring the house as best she can as her mobility is rapidly deteriorating, she gets into the garage and finds like this sack, this plastic garbage bag with like her body part stuffed into it. It's really, really visceral, like more than I expected from FNAF. And then like Eleanor shows up at the last minute to throw her the middle finger basically and just walks away cackling. And Sarah straight up dies. They just murk her. It was so cruel. I was like, oh my god, after what happened into the pit, I thought this is a thing where like something bad would happen and the kid would get scared straight and they'd reevaluate their priorities, but they'd be allowed to like survive to learn the lesson. But no, Sarah learns the lesson entirely too late, and she is just stone dead. And the implication is that her mother will just find this statue corpse in their garage in a sack full of bloodied body parts. Like, that was way darker a turn than I was expecting this story to take. That was a bit much. That shocked me. And you know what? I'm happy for it, because I was actually kind of relieved that they were willing to go that route and they were willing to do something with it. Now, as I understand it, due to hearing some discussions of later books, Eleanor is a really big deal in later stories. She doesn't show up again in the first 4 books, but I guess it's one of those things where, like, keep it in mind at some point in the future I'll get the other books and I'll be able to follow up on this, because apparently she's a big deal, but I don't know why. So the third story of book 1 is Count the Ways. And this one was really interesting to me because the main character is this girl named Millie. And Millie's whole thing is she's living with her grandpa because her parents are I believe they're out of the country. I think they were like Saudi Arabia or something. And they were always this kind of like, there was somewhere in between a get-rich-quick scheme and, this is the next hot thing kind of people, where they're always looking for their opportunities and at the same time looking for shortcuts. They walked this weird tightrope act of irresponsibility, but also genuinely trying, which I thought was interesting enough. It made them very quirky for what little screen time they had for what little, text time they had in the story. What was really cool is that the grandpa in particular is characterized well, because Millie is going through her goth phase. Her obligatory ZOMG guys, dark and angst and wearing black and Wicca is super cool, you guys, high school phase. And I don't want if there are any girls in the comment section right now, like about to start defending themselves, you all went through it. I went in high school too. I saw you all do it. I know for a fact you all have had it. Don't deny it. So Millie is really into, like, she's into Poe, she's into dark poetry, and she's like, oh, she finds the idea of death very romantic, and it's all very exciting. And the story is actually bookended from the perspective of Millie being, she's trapped inside something, but we're not told what it is until the very end. So Millie's trapped inside, and she's having this conversation with someone that you don't get any identification for again until the story's over. And she is terrified. And as she's reflecting on the events that have led her up to this moment, she's like, oh, I met this guy at school. We became friends. I kind of started crushing on him. He started dating this girl who I thought was kind of preppy. And it's almost like a sincere version of, like, Ebony, Dementia, Darkness, Ravenway, except Millie is actually a lot more sincere. I'm pretty sure My Immortal was a troll anyway. So she has this, like, moment. I remember the thing that stuck out to me in this story that I really liked is she's talking about uh, this particular poem. I want to say Annabel Lee. Yes, okay, it was Annabel Lee from Edgar Allan Poe, and the grandpa actually has a moment where he starts reciting the poem. He knows exactly what she's talking about. And it's like the first time Millie and her grandfather have this connection. And when she mentions that grandpa mentions how it made him stop to reflect that how he lost his wife several years ago and that he still misses her to this day. And Millie has this moment where she reads the poem again after the fact, and she's like, well, maybe it's not a poem about death. Maybe it's actually uh, more a story of love and celebration of life in its own way. I thought that was really cool. So here's the thing, the big twist is that while Millie is going through this angst, this very, very angsty high school phase, and we all did. If you are in high school right now, you are now, whether you know it or not. Trust me, I know a thing or two. So she's trapped inside of the mechanical husk of Funtime Freddy. Like, I don't know how this works. As far as we knew, Funtime Freddy's innards got scooped out at the end of Sister Location. Or this is another Funtime Freddy who's just hollow, inexplicably. But yeah, it's Funtime Freddy. He's fully functional, and he has quite the macabre sense of humor. Reading his dialogue is actually very entertaining. It's actually really good. His banter is very witty. I actually quite liked him. And here's the thing. He's basically the entire time trying to come up with ways to kill her. He's like, oh, well, you're so in love with death, so, like, obviously you want me to do this. This is obviously what we both want. And she's like, no, please, God, no, anything, please don't do that. So at the end, she's like, I have one chance to get out of here. And so she basically bluffs. It's like, oh, well, I guess, given all the options you've given me, decapitation would be the fastest. And Funtime Freddy's just like, okay, I'll like take this sheet of, like, sheet metal and just, like, slam it through my own torso, which should do the job. And it just stops. The story ends completely inconclusively. So I will say, of all the cliffhanger endings where there is no resolution, this is the one where I wanted to see the hero survive the most. Millie starts off as such an unlikable shrew that at first I wasn't that invested in her. But as the story goes on, you see the light bulb coming on. You see her having these moments where she's like, hey, maybe I'm kind of being a bad friend. Hey, maybe I'm kind of being a bad granddaughter. Maybe I'm being a bad daughter. Maybe I should give people an honest chance. And she's, like, almost there by the time she's trapped inside this Funtime Freddy. I don't even know what to say about that. That's still kind of sending me reeling here. I want Millie to have come out okay. I don't know if any other stories ever bring her up again. I hope they do, because I think of all the characters who get the ambiguous ending, Millie, I think, deserves that chance at redemption. And so I hope Ellie Cooper and Scott Cawthon, wherever you are right now, you've heard my request. I really want Millie to make it out okay. And that's the end of the first book. I'm not going to worry too much about the overarching story because it's very short in each part of the uh, in each segment at the end of each book, it's really, really short, and it switches perspectives. The whole story hinges on this figure known as the Stitch Wraith, and how it actually has two young boys, young men. I don't know if it actually says their ages or not. If it did, I forgot. Jake and Andrew, and they're trapped inside this animatronic that seems to have the power to like suck the life out of things that they touch, and they don't really seem to like each other very much. So I'm really curious to see where it'll go. But even through the 4 books that I've read, it really hasn't gone very far. So more on that later, or another video. So book 2 is Fetch, and of course the first story is Fetch. Basically, this kid, and I've already forgotten his name. Greg. That's not confusing at all. So it's Greg, not Gregory. Totally different people here. I'm sure that was a coincidence. This book was written a while ago. So Greg and his friends decide to just randomly go into this Fazbear's Pizza that's been closed down for a few years. And the thing is, like, I don't think he ever really said why he was all that interested in going in the first place. Cyril and Hadi, his friends are Cyril and Hadi, and they go in and they're just like looking for whatever's in there, I guess. It's a little directionless at first, I'll be honest, and the story goes some very strange directions. Like, it starts going into theoretical physics at one point and tries to kind of like parallel that maybe this entity Fetch runs on similar property. It's very strange. Like, I guess maybe they're trying to be a little heady about it so that there's like more psi than phi in the story. But the whole thing is they find this animatronic dog, which they say is about the size of, indeed, a small dog. And the whole thing is it syncs to your phone. And so Greg is like, oh, you know, it'd be cool if I could get whenever he basically talks or mentions wanting something, then Fetch tries to get it in the way that he can. I'm trying to think of a good example, but honestly, it's one of those things where this story was a little bit meandery, and it wasn't very focused. But like, there's this whole thing where Greg's uncle is like this is one of those guys who he has the freakish luck. Everything seems to kind of just work out in his favor, and his joke is like, "Oh no, it's all on my index finger. It's my finger of good luck." And there's a bit where Greg kind of laments, like, "Ah, man, I wish I had a finger of good luck." And then he's like, "I have made a terrible mistake," and Fetch attacks his uncle and literally tears his finger off under the impression that's literally what Greg wants. And so the whole thing is it's this very be careful what you wish for kind of storytelling here. In fact, I think the second book revels in that quite a bit. And like, yeah, I just cracked the book open. Yeah, there's this whole thing about 0-point fields and REGs, and like it's all kind of out of nowhere, and it's not really something that FNAF has ever dabbled in. But again, this does have different writers. It's Andrea Wagoner, give that my best shot, and Carly Ann West wrote this one. And I like Fetch on the whole. I think the story wanders a bit, and the ending doesn't really make any sense. Because he gets to the point where Fetch is doing all this stuff, and it's freaking him out. It's getting progressively creepier because Fetch's interpretation of what he wants is not always what Greg is actually asking for. It's very literal-minded. So, like, oh, I wish I had a finger of good luck. He literally tears a finger off. It's like, oh, this must be what the human wanted. So he confronts Fetch in the backyard, and he just bludgeons it and smashes it over and over and over and over again. And it confirms, like, oh yeah, it's literally just a robot dog. There's nothing special about it. It's a robot dog whose AI is going haywire. The story more or less confirms there's nothing supernatural about it. It was just programmed really badly, and given this is a Fazbear entertainment product, of course it was. So at the end of the story, like, it ends on this kind of cliffhanger moment where it's implied that Fetch has attacked the girl that Greg likes, and it's just sitting there in his hallway, just like still half demolished. So it's like, what is stopping people from stopping this thing? Greg by himself bashed the thing into little pieces, and like, okay, maybe it was still functional, maybe he hadn't damaged it so thoroughly as to stop it from moving. Fine, I'll accept that at face value, but what's to stop you from doing it now, and why hasn't anyone else? Like, if you have the torque to smash this thing, your grown adult uncle sure does. So, like, it ends inconclusively. Honestly, Greg is kind of a tool. I don't really care what happens to him. Oh, that sounds terrible to say because I think he's like in middle or high school. It's like that's really rough. But like he has this really obvious thing happening. He drags his feet and realizing what's happening, and then when he finally puts it together, he just keeps screwing it up. He doesn't get help. He doesn't actually try to do anything about it. For some reason, they inexplicably go back to the pizzeria thinking that will change something, and that leads to absolutely nothing. That changes nothing in the story. That entire bit could have been cut out. And then, like, when he confronts Fetch again, like, he's already attacked his uncle, he's attacked his love interest, and now he's back to him again. He's like, he's already demolished. How is this thing a threat to anybody? And why at this point? So it's like, I don't know. It felt like this one required a little more polish. I wouldn't call it bad. I enjoyed the story on the whole. It was just a little bit unfocused. That's a good word for it, unfocused. The next story is Lonely Freddy. And this one is interesting, and it's one of those things where there's a really strong sibling rivalry. Because there was the brother, Alec, and his sister Hazel. And there's this whole thing is basically Alec is acting out. And literally, like, all he wants is his parents to sit down and, like, actually talk to him like a grown adult. But he doesn't say that. He just thinks it really hard and just kind of wants everyone to read his mind. Hazel is basically Little Miss Perfect. She's basically doing the opposite of everything Alec does, where she's like a straight A student, she's working really hard, she's in extracurricular activities, she's doing all this stuff. And Alec resents her for it. And the entire story, he's just like, God, I hate Hazel. She's so dumb. Wish she would go away. I hate her so much. And the entire time, Hazel is so obviously trying to bury the hatchet, and she's trying so hard to be friends with her brother. And I don't know. This rubbed me the wrong way, in part because I have two sisters. And I'm the youngest, but I still have siblings. Like, I get how it works. And it's like, she's trying so hard and being so earnest about the whole thing, and he is such an unlikable little jerk. I hate Alec so much. So, Hazel's birthday is coming up, and Hazel's like, I have this idea. Hear me out. Our parents expect us for you to be the bad kid and for me to be the good kid. What if we reversed the script? What if you were the perfect kid? What if we went out of our way for you to act like you were perfect and I was the troublemaker? And they do this for a while, and it's actually this really fun bit of psychological warfare where the parents are just like completely at wit's end and have no idea what's going on. But like they're still not talking to their kid. They're literally like reading these parenting books and they're not actually addressing the issue. The parents are just as frustrating as Alec is in that regard. Hazel's the only one with a brain cell in this family. So eventually, Hazel's birthday is coming up. So they schedule her a party, of course, at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, because where else would you have your party in this universe? So her whole thing is she wants this particular Foxy doll. It's called the Yarg Foxy, which is strange, but also very like in character for how Fazbear would name their products. So the whole thing is like she has to go through this wind tunnel and she has to get this particular ticket. And Alec is like, I'm going to sabotage this. I'm going to be a jerk again. Literally unprovoked. He literally just does this because he's petty. And really around here is where I was like, I don't know where the story is going, but I really hate Alec. So anything bad that happens to him is justified. So he tries to sabotage it. It ends up not being sabotaged. And basically in a reversal of fortune, that cosmological, divine intervention is really the only explanation. Hazel gets the ticket for the Yarg Foxy doll. And Alec, like, rips it and, like, tears, I think it's toward the arm or the head off or something, and just runs away, like, crying like a little kid. And I'm like, bro, you're supposed to be the older sibling. Why are you like this? So, like, the whole setup to this point is, like, they had been to Freddy's a few times to plan the party. And they create these, like, little miniature, almost helpy-looking versions of Freddy. And the idea is like, if you were the unpopular kid, if you didn't have any kids at your birthday party, you would get paired up with a lonely Freddy, they call them, which is a terrible name. Why would you call them that? Lonely Freddies are supposed to be issued to the uncool kids, the unpopular kids. And at the end, Alec like ends up throwing himself in this back room, and at that point, when it's very clearly too late in the story for it to be much anything else, uh, he's like, "Oh man, I'm a huge jerk." I'm like, "Yes, welcome to the start of the story where everyone else began." I hate you, Alec. And he's like, "Maybe I can still make it right." And he bumps into one of the lonely Freddies. And it starts asking him these random questions. And it's like, "What's your favorite color? What's your favorite food?" And Alec just kind of starts going along, okay, and starts telling him all the answers that Lonely Freddy's asking him. And the next thing Alec knows, he is the Lonely Freddy. He's inside the little animatronic suit. Now, not his body. His body walked back to the table, made amends with his sister, and is actually being like a good big brother to her. And like what some kid I think like dropped soda or like one of them throws up on him. I forget. It was really gross. And so one of the workers is like, "Oh, throw it in the box." And he gets thrown in, and like there's other lonely Freddies. And as he's like trying to figure out how to move the body of the lonely Freddy, he realizes that like all the other lonely Freddies have like souls of victims in them too. And it's like, this is weird even by Fazbear Entertainment standards, but Alex is such an unlikable little jerk that I'm still pretty happy with the outcome. I don't understand it. The soul transfer thing makes no sense. It's probably not even something that Fazbear Entertainment did deliberately. That's just the weirdness that seems to surround this entire industry. But like, oh my god, Alex sucks so hard. I hate him so much. He got exactly what he deserved. I'm not upset at all. Anyway, the last story for book 2 is Out of Stock. And the main character is Oscar and his two buddies, which Raj and Isaac. And they are so obsessed with the new hottest toy, which of course is Fazbear Entertainment's new hottest toy, the Plush Trap Chaser, which is just a weird thing to have to consider. We as fans of the games kind of thought Plush Trap was just some weird thing that Scott threw into FNAF 4 just for like the little mini game bit. No, apparently he's canon, and for some reason the book continuously refers to it as being green, even though Plush Trap is very obviously yellow, even if like a weathered mustard yellow, still yellow. Anyway, it is like the hot item. So Oscar and his friends rush to the mall to try to get this toy, and they're sold out. And they're like in line for a long time. The staff's like, "Yeah, sorry, we literally just sold out." And Oscar notices that there is, in fact, one more because there was a return. And the dialogue around this return should have tipped Oscar off that this is a terrible idea. But what he decides to do is he like kind of steals the toy, but also kind of doesn't, because he and his friends, Raj and Isaac, actually pooled their money together to buy this toy together, because apparently it's relatively expensive. I don't think it says what the price is in the story. So he just kind of like throws the money at the employees, grabs the box, and then runs out of the store. And somehow they get away with this. And so they open up the box, and it describes the Plush Trap Chaser in like this really unnerving way, where it's like it has fleshy, like human-looking eyeballs that are like that they aren't like hard plastic toy eyes. They're actually like squishy and veiny, like human eyes, and the teeth look like human teeth but sharper. And I'm like, okay, this is an interesting direction to take it. And they discover the toy. The idea behind the Plush Trap Chaser is really similar to actually how it operates in the FNAF 4 minigame. It moves when it's dark, and it stops when light is shown in its face. So when light is on, it can't move. So they kind of mess with it, and they kind of mess with it, and eventually they really can't get this thing to work. It's a little bit finicky. So they're like, forget it. We'll just kind of hang out instead, and we'll just like play video games. Well, there's a thunderstorm, and the power goes out. And suddenly the plush trap chaser is, indeed, chasing. And it starts chewing through, like, Oscar's bedroom doorknob. And I'm like, oh, that raises the stakes a tiny bit. It's a really great chase. Like, it's one long continuous chase sequence from here to the end of the story. And like, Raj, Isaac, and Oscar are like rotating who's in control of the situation. And like, oh, we got to shine the flashlight in his face. The flashlight's bugging. Oh, we got to get to the next door. We got to put something between it and us, but that lets it run because there's no light in its face, so on and so forth. And then they're like, it can mimic people's voices. So like, the plush trap starts mimicking Oscar's mother's voice. And I'm like, that's devilish. That's pretty good. I like that. That could be a game mechanic. I played a Lethal Company mod that did something similar to that actually, and it's really interesting. If there was another one of these short stories that could easily be turned into a game in addition to Into the Pit, I would say Out of Stock is a great contender for it. I really like this one. Out of Stock really should have been the headliner, and I think Fetch should have been the middle story. Um, 'Cause as it is, I think they kind of put Fetch, which is just okay, at the front, which they shouldn't really have done. Which, ironically enough, takes us into book 3, which is called 1:35 a.m. And I'm going to be honest, like, these are like, it's written by the same people who wrote the first 2 books, so I'm going to come out swinging here. I'm just going to come out swinging on this one. 1:35 a.m. might be the single worst story in the first 4 books. I don't know if any of the later stories would necessarily be viewed as, like, worse, necessarily, just having not read them, but I will say 1:35 a.m. was a little bit difficult to get through start to finish. The main character is this woman named Delilah. And one of the things I actually did think was interesting is, like, every protagonist up to this point has been a school-aged kid. Like, Oswald was, like, in middle or I think elementary or middle school, and, like, Sarah was in high school, and so on and so forth. Delilah's a grown woman. She's working age. She's out of school. She's working at a diner and making the best of a bad situation. She had been married and divorced, and she has like these. She was there was this whole backstory about like she and her best friend were adopted by this guy who was some kind of prior military. I think they said Marines or Army. I forget. The problem with everything that I'm telling you up to this point is it doesn't go anywhere. Delilah, for all intents and purposes, doesn't get a character arc. Instead, what happens is she finds this doll. She finds this doll at a garage sale. So Ella is the name of the doll, and the whole thing is it kind of drives Delilah a little bonkers at first because she sees it at a yard sale. And she's like, oh, well, it looks a lot like what I imagined my hypothetical child would have looked like back when I was married, and I wanted to name my child Emma. And Ella is really close to Emma. So she buys the doll, and the lady at the garage sale is like, oh yeah, most of its functions are broken. It apparently could do like all this other different things. It was called a helper doll. It could be an alarm clock, manage appointments, keep tracks of lists, take photos, read stories, sing songs, and serve drinks. Sounds like the Fazbear entertainment rival to the Amazon Echo, right? So most of Ella's functions are broken, but the lady is very honest about it. She's like, really the only thing that works is the alarm clock function. And Delilah's like, well, knock a few bucks off the price and I'll take it. And so she sets it to 1:35 p.m., which is right before her evening shift at the diner. And it doesn't go off. And she gets mad and immediately throws Ella in the dumpster. And she just immediately, goodbye, boom, into the dumpster. And then she starts getting woken up at 1:35 a.m. And at first she's like, oh, well, Ella must still be in the dumpster and the alarm must have been misset. And I'm like, that is such a flying leap. Like, you bought this thing with your own money, and then, like, the instant you think something's wrong, you trash it. Like, you're the crazy one here, Delilah, not the doll. So the rest of the story, I'm not kidding. The rest of the story, let me check the table of contents here. The rest of the remaining 90 pages. I mean, relatively small book, but 90 pages nonetheless, is Delilah gets scared by something, and she thinks it's Ella, but it's not Ella. And she goes, "Oh no, that's so scary." Over and over and over again. It's a lot. It's a lot of her being scared by nothing. And there's a bit where I kind of thought the story was going somewhere where she's like at work at the diner and she swears up and down she sees Ella and sees it like walking around. And I'm like, oh, okay. Well, now it's gonna happen now because like before she's just like, oh no, I'm in my apartment and it's suddenly like very scary and Ella must be in the walls or Ella must be in the vents and nothing's happening. At the diner, I kind of thought this was all going somewhere and then it doesn't. It just doesn't. It never goes anywhere. And she goes around and around and around. And she tries talking to her best friend, and her best friend's like, oh, well, there's numerology. Numbers have meanings. And that doesn't go anywhere. And then she, like, tries to change shifts at her job. And that doesn't go anywhere. And ultimately she gets fired from her job, and that doesn't go anywhere because nothing with Delilah goes anywhere. And Delilah drives out to the far reaches of the city, goes to a construction site, hides her purse. Like they do this big thing where like they're very expressly breaking down what she's doing, but they'll like start doing it halfway into the story. And like, it's all so deliberate. I kind of thought maybe it was all leading towards something. And then she climbs into an air duct on the construction site, and it's implied that she just dies. That's the story. I'm not kidding. Holding the book in my hand right now. She literally just dies. Ella's never seen after Delilah chunks her into the dumpster. So, what gives? I have no idea. In the 4 books, it's not brought up again. Delilah honestly seems like 1:35 a.m. kind of seems less like a Five Nights at Freddy's story and more like a take good care of your mental health kind of story, which is fine. FNAF does some stuff kind of like that. But it's all so pointless. Fetch was a little meandering. This story was almost nothing but meandering. There's tons and tons and tons of setup that all feels like it should pay off, and then none of it ever does. It's kind of frustrating to read. If I were to reread these books, I'd probably skip 1:35 a.m. The next story, which also should have been the headliner of its book, is Room for One More. So there's this guy. This is the story about a man named Stanley. No, I'm serious. He's actually a man named Stanley. And he works as a security guard at what is very strongly implied to be the sister location of Five Nights at Freddy's sister location. So he's sitting in the security booth, and his express instructions were, stay here, make sure nothing gets out. And he goes, don't you mean make sure that no one gets in? And his boss goes, sure, why not? And just kind of leaves it at that. And you actually learn Stanley's backstory, and it actually is pretty impactful, I would say. Stanley's kind of a sad sack. Honestly, this was my OMG, he's actually me, FR moment in these books. Because Stanley, he's a grown man. Again, we have that kind of theme in book 3, where it's like we go from kids to adults. Stanley's girlfriend broke up with him. He kind of got into a depressive state. He's not been treating himself the best. He's kind of eating junk food and Chinese takeout and cheeseburgers, and he's not actually taking the time out to care for himself. He works this night job in like this essentially cramped, dirty basement where he never meets or interacts with anyone. Which, like, kind of the perfect storm for insanity to start setting in. And Stanley's like, you know what? I should be doing better. I should be taking better care of myself. I should be doing more. I should talk to my mom some more. I should see my sister. And I'm like, you know what, Stanley, you're all right. You're an interesting guy. I like you. And one night, because he even admits, he's like, he goes to work and then just like goes to sleep on his desk because no one's around. Like the only reason he keeps doing the job is because the paycheck just keeps getting direct deposited into his account. So he's just like, fine. So he goes to work and just sleeps because it doesn't matter. But one night he wakes up and what's very clearly supposed to be a mini Rena from Sister Location shows up on his desk. And she goes, "Oh, I like you. Take me home with you." And he's like, "Yeah, that's pretty cute. You know, someone obviously did this as a prank." And you know, he kind of messes with it and kind of plays with it, and he's like, "Nah, forget it. I'm going back to sleep. It's not worth it." And night after night, this little mini Rena kind of keeps coming and going. She shows up and she'll say things like, "Oh, I like you. You know, take me home with you." And he's like, "You know what? Maybe they do understand what I'm saying. Maybe I can talk to it." And he's like, "You know what? Just sit here, chill out on my desk, and if you are still here when I wake up, I'll take you home." But it never is. Instead, he notices his arm starts feeling like really swollen and stiff and irritated. And he has this phobia. He hates going to the doctor. His dad went to the doctor's office and all it got him was a cancer diagnosis and he died shortly after. So Stanley is just like, "No, I'm not doing that. That's what happened to my dad. It's going to happen to me. I'm not doing it." I have to say, Stanley's backstory is so much more impactful than Delilah's because it actually impacts the decisions he's making in the current day, which is such a huge thing with Stanley as a character. So this keeps happening, but it's not just his arm. His other arm starts suffering the same fate, and then his legs, and then his torso, and he's getting bloated. His skin is hard, and he feels awful. He's coughing up blood. Eating and drinking is getting harder and harder. He's like, "Okay, I must be sick. I have to be. Like, there's nothing else this can be, right?" His sister comes and visits him, and they actually had this very genuine heart to heart that like I could have seen my sister and I having. And she's like, "Go to the doctor." So he goes to this little walk-in clinic. They give him some basic antibiotics. They don't really treat it as anything serious. And then he's like, "You know what? I still have to go to work. I still have to get paid." So he goes back to work, and this mini Rena shows up on his desk, and then another, and another, and another. And he's like, "It's not just been one. There's been multiple this whole time." And they tell him, "Oh, you're warm and soft. We like being near you." He's like, "So let us in." And he's like, "What?" "I'm sorry, what?" And they've been like climbing into his mouth. Like, this is so physically impossible, but it's such an interesting body horror element added in where the mini arenas would like climb into his mouth and like worm their way across his body. He would not just have like a swollen limb. He would have really bad infections and stomach bleeding. He would have gone to the hospital as soon as the first one started like moving around in there. But like, it's such an interesting and cool body horror thing to do to him. And like the really really I'm laughing, but it's really really sad because when he finally realizes what's happened, like the final night, he's writing this letter to his now ex-girlfriend, like explaining like, "This is my plan, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to make myself a better person, and even if we don't get back together again, I want you to know that I'm going to do my best to be the best version of me." And he turns and starts running as best he can, given he can barely move. And these mini Renas just like overtake him like a horde of demonic mechanical Fazbear licensed Pikmin, and start forcing themselves into his mouth. And he dies. They literally killed my boy Stanley. It was super sad. I was like, oh, that hit me in the feels. I really really liked Room for One More. Again, is it physically possible? No. Was it really interesting and compelling? Yes. Yes, it absolutely was. Stanley's story in Room for One More is really what 1:35 a.m. should have been and wasn't. So the last story in this book, so I'm already taking way longer than I thought I would be, is called The New Kid. And it's all about these two friends, Devin and Mick. And Mick is kind of like the heavyset kid who's like naive, but generally well-meaning. And Devin's kind of the more mischievous one who's always trying to get them into trouble. So as they're going through their routine, they meet this new kid, and his name is Kelsey. which I don't know. Something about that is kind of weird to me. Like where I grew up, Kelsey was always a girl's name, but whatever. Kelsey's this kind of cool dude. He's really charismatic. Like everyone kind of just takes to him. He has this very laid back sense of humor kind of guy. And Devin just like immediately hates him. He doesn't. He's just like, oh, this guy sucks. I don't like him. He's definitely a fake. I'm like, dude, you and Alec both suck. And the entire time, Mick is trying to be like, oh no, he's cool. He's trying to be our friend. He's a cool guy. Devin is just like unrelentingly a jerk. And so, very long story made short, because this one kind of meanders a little bit. They get to this point where they find an abandoned Freddy Fazbear's pizza location out in the middle of the woods. And there, their whole thing is like they're kind of big on urban exploration, but the town they're in is relatively small, so there's not too many opportunities. Devin gets there first, and he finds a Springlock suit. And I kind of thought it was going the Springtrap direction. It actually doesn't. Instead, it was actually a Spring Freddy suit. And Devin basically tricks Kelsey into putting it on. And the spring locks go off. And he falls to the ground just shaking and convulsing. His blood is pouring out of the suit. Devin just runs. And Mick is so scared, he doesn't know what else to do, so he just follows Devin. And the entire time, like the next 3 days or so, Mick is like, Kelsey could still be alive. He could still be there waiting for us. We need to bring him help. And Devin's like, if we tell someone that we did this, we're getting arrested. End of story. And I was like, priorities. So Devin drags his feet until Mick basically just like emotionally blackmails Devin into finally getting off his hands and doing something. So Devin returns and looks at the suit, and it's like it's locked tight. And I think it even compares it to rigor mortis, which I found just like delightfully dark. And he tries to wedge the mouth open, and he gets his hand stuck. And then like as he's trying to fight loose, he actually gets like his arm deeper into the throat. And then like the head pops open, and he looks down, and Devin doesn't see Kelsey in there. He sees himself. And then the suit just like swallows him. I'm just like, oh my God, what is happening right now? And then it's like, oh, at a school several miles away, Kelsey is just there inexplicably. And I'm like, what just happened? Why? What is this story? But I'll be honest, I enjoyed it. I thought it was good. Room for One More is my favorite for book 3, but New Kid is pretty good. The ending is kind of a head scratcher because I get the feeling they want to revisit that in the future and just haven't yet. So that's one of those things that's going to be a glass coffin situation. Remains to be seen. So the next, and by next I mean last on our particular tour, is book 4, which is Step Closer. And like before, Step Closer is the name of the first book. The main character is Pete, and Pete has a little brother, who is Chuck. Pete and Chuck have this really tumultuous relationship. Pete gives Chuck a hard time, but Chuck also kind of likes to banter, so they kind of have... They're brothers. It's very clear they're brothers. And so they go to Freddy Fazbear's, of course, for Chuck's birthday one year. And one of the things is Chuck is just kind of seeming like inexplicably afraid of Foxy, which I mean, fair point. And so his brother thinks it'd be funny if he dragged Chuck over to him. Well, Chuck gets away and legs it. So while he's there, Pete's like, well, I'm here anyway, I might as well. And he hits this switch. That's like the Showtime button for Foxy. And he starts singing the song, this weird little like, oh, if you want to be a pirate, you have to lose your hand and replace it with a hook, and lose an eye and replace it with a patch. And Pete's like, well, that's stupid. And then this stuff straight out of like Final Destination starts happening, where stuff just starts flying at his eyes and trying to take his hand off. Like he walks past a construction site and a buzzsaw blade like goes flying like Metal Man just chucked it at him and almost gets his hand taken off. And he's just like, what was that about? That was so crazy. Like Well, okay, that was a freak occurrence, 1 in a million chance. So their dad, who apparently has not been in the picture, their parents are divorced and live with their mother. So his dad shows up. He's like, you know what? I heard what happened. Let's go fishing. Have a little father-son bonding time. And Pete's like, that's stupid. You're never here any other time. But now that I've been almost had my hand taken off, suddenly you want to be involved. They go fishing. Pete's lure gets like slammed into the high part of his cheek and almost in his eyeball, which like the way they describe it actually made me visibly wince. Like pretty gruesome. And he's just like, and his little brother is like, okay, here's what's happening. You heard Foxy sing the song about losing a hand and losing an eye, and then you almost lost a hand, then you almost lost an eye. So this is all going somewhere. And Pete's like, this is stupid. You're stupid. That's obviously, this is just a freak occurrence. It can't be real. It keeps happening. It keeps happening. And Chuck is more and more convinced. He's like, you have to go see Foxy. You have to do something to break the curse. Because otherwise, this is just going to keep happening to you. And Pete is fighting it up until there's a festival at his high school. And then he does get hit in the eye, nearly blinded. I think it was like a dart throwing game. And he gets his hand repeatedly caught and injured. And he starts like running this full sprint. And he calls Chuck on his cell phone. He's like, you were right. It's so much worse than I thought. I'm sorry I doubted you. Let's go to Fazbear's. I almost said FNAF. Let's go to Fazbear's right now and address Foxy. And Pete gets hit by a car. Just bam! Out of nowhere. And at the end, you see it from his perspective as he's literally a corpse on a gurney. And they're like, oh, well, we have need of donors. And it turns out that Pete and Chuck were made into organ donors by their mother. She was like, oh, give that giving spirit. And like, for some reason, Pete's consciousness is still floating around. And he's just like, wait, what are you doing? They're like, oh, well, his hand and his eye are still good. So we'll take those. So they do. And as this is happening, Chuck goes to Freddy Fazbear's and goes up to Foxy and throws the switch. And nothing happens. Bam. Mic drop. Really good. Probably the best headliner story since book one. I really liked it. I liked the dynamic between the brothers because there was tension between them, but they had their moments where they were like, okay, let's work together. Let's figure this out. And it was much less hostile than like Alec and Hazel, for instance. I thought that one was pretty good. Really enjoyed that one. So the next is Dance With Me. And Dance With Me is also really interesting because, again, it focuses on adult characters. This being Casey, who's a thief. And it starts off with her in like this little like group of thieves with two other guys, but they're not important. Casey eventually, she steals this bag from this mother and daughter who walk out of a Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. Like, surprise, right? Well, in the bag are these like AR glasses. She describes them as being very cheap and cardboard, like old 1980s 3D glasses. When she tries them on, in the distance she can see Ballora from Sister Location dancing. And she's like, that's weird, kind of novel. Maybe that's some kind of like AR feature that the restaurant has. Well, she tries them on again at their thief's hideout, which is like some old warehouse, and Ballora is there. So she's like, okay, it's not proximity to the restaurant then. But every time she's checking, Ballora is gradually closer to her. And one day, she looks outside and she sees the leaves spinning in one very exact place, but the wind is still. And she's going, oh God, that must be Ballora. And she's like too afraid to even try the glasses on. So she packs her stuff and she leaves. Like she ditches the other thieves. I don't know if they show up again, but that would actually be an interesting plot hook, I think. So Casey legs it. She gets on the bus stop and she's the next town over. And she puts the glasses on and Ballora is closer than before. She's like, what do you want from me? Why does this keep happening? What is going on? So eventually she's like, you know what this is? This is my sign that what I've been doing is wrong. And I need to get my life in order. So she tries being a waitress at a diner. And I don't think it's the same diner as the one from 1:35 a.m. It'd be kind of neat if it was. I think that'd be a fun little continuity nod, but I haven't read the visual novel versions of these, so I don't know if that's the case. So As I recall, the boss man had different names in each, so maybe not. Anyway, she starts as a waitress, and her old habits start coming back. She starts stealing tips from other waitresses. She gets into a bit of a confrontation. The boss man's just like, you know what? I don't even care that bad. Just like, don't do it again, and it'll be fine. Because I don't have proof. I don't have. It's not like he's like slacking off. It's more like I don't have proof to say that's what's happening definitively. So to stop this before it gets out of hand, it's like, don't do it again. It'll be fine. Well, Casey's like, nope, and she just leaves. She goes to the next town over, and Ballora is still right on her trail. And at this point, she's coming unglued. And she's like, oh my god, what happens when Ballora is within arm's reach of me? What happens to me then? So that this Ballora becomes like this omen of death to Casey. And Casey's like, I have to do something. I have to really actually change as a person, or Ballora will get me, whatever that entails. So she puts in for a job interview, which she does get. She gets the interview scheduled, which proves that this book is terribly unrealistic. And she goes to this store, and she wants to get this dress and these shoes for the interview. And she doesn't have enough money. So she's like, you know what? One last time, I can justify this to myself. She does this a lot. She does the human rationale very, very, I can justify this kind of behavior. So she buys the shoes, tries to steal the dress, and gets caught. And by sweet serendipity, or rather maybe a metaphor for a certain someone, if you get my drift, this old lady comes up and she's like, you know what? I will pay for the dress. And the cashier's like, what are you doing? Like, you're a regular here. You don't have to do this. And the old lady goes, no, I don't have to. But I believe her. I want to believe that maybe she's made mistakes in the past and maybe she can do better going forward. So I'm going to pay for the dress and she promises to not ever steal again. And Casey is like in hysterics. She's sobbing and bawling, and it's very emotional. I actually really like that bit. I'm not making fun. I like it sincerely. And she's like, before the interview, there's one thing I absolutely need to do. And because she stole the bag from the lady and the little girl at the start of the story, she had her ID card, so she knew where the lady lived. So she went to the lady's house and returns everything. And she goes, I was the pickpocket, I was the thief, I stole your stuff, and I'm sorry, and I'm going to pay you back every penny I owe you. And she hands the bag to the lady, and she's like, I'm changing my life, I'm not going to be that same person again. If you want to call the cops on me, that's fine, I accept that. And the lady goes, you know what, I'm not going to do that. In fact, I'm going to choose to forgive you. And I really, really like this story because it's the first one of these stories, and hopefully not the last, where the theme is forgiveness, where Casey was so scared just by Ballora's presence. Like, Ballora doesn't speak. She doesn't issue a threat. She's just there, and that's enough. And Casey cracks. And in that, she's like, I have to change. This is my sign that I have to change. And the old lady at the store and the lady she stole from accept it. And I think that's really powerful. I think that's something that could be used as a theme in these future stories as we're moving forward, and even in like Tales of the Pizzaplex kind of thing. Actually, I'd love to see that theme explored a lot more. Forgiveness is not a theme that's predominantly explored in Five Nights at Freddy's, but I feel like it's kind of a missed opportunity. I think you could easily do that. So the last story we'll be covering is Coming Home. Coming Home is about this small family of Susie and Samantha, who are sisters, and their mother. And they learn pretty quickly that their father had gone estranged sometime before. And the relationship was definitely strained as a result. What you very quickly put together, as Susie is largely narrating everything, you learn that the family has this very strained relationship since the father left. But then you learn there was another tragedy, is that even though Susie is our narrator, ostensibly for the story, she's dead. Susie's a ghost, and she's visiting her family over and over and over again when she can. There's certain areas she can and can't go. It's mostly around their house, and she's trying to like have these conversations, and it seems like her sister can see her and her mother can't. And every night, every night, you see Chica the chicken walks into their house, takes Susie by the hand, and walks out. And at first, it's very much like, why is this happening? what is going on? Until you learn that Susie was one of the victims at the original pizzeria. I say original, that could mean literally anything at this point, this franchise. So Susie can come back for a short window of time, but only for a couple of days, because she starts drawing pictures for her sister Samantha to explain, I only have so much time. And another thing she explains is she needs to find a particular doll that was shared between the two sisters. And the thing is, Samantha and Susie got into a fight because they both played with their dolls very differently. Samantha was very orderly, very clean, very methodical. And Susie was more chaotic, and she'd come up with these wild stories, this very imaginative child. And it drove Samantha nuts, because siblings do that. And Susie leaves these pictures for her sister. And she's like, we have limited time. I need you to find the doll. And on the last night, when Samantha puts it together that this is the last night she has, Chica doesn't take Susie. Chica pulls Susie to the front door and just kind of leaves her there. And Chica enters the house. Now, is this actually Chica? Is this like a twisted Chica? I don't know. Okay. At this point, anything's possible. This is FNAF. Anything's real now. And Chica starts going after Samantha. And Samantha puts together what Susie had been trying to tell her, that their father had a hidden compartment in one of the rooms in his old study. And in there, in a hidden compartment that Susie had previously found, was the doll. When Samantha obtained the doll, Chica and Susie vanish. And it's quiet. And Samantha finally lets herself cry. And the story is super sad. Like, it kind of hit me. You know what? This is one of the, I would say one of the best of the first 12 stories. Coming Home actually hit me in a really, really sensitive spot. That's in part because I have siblings, and I come from an older family, so I know what losses in the family can feel like. But it was very heartfelt. It felt genuine. And the fact that it ties into the murders at the pizzeria, which again, most of these have been their own little self-contained things, and a lot of the time, Freddy and company don't show up. Like in To Be Beautiful, Sarah has a Freddy plush, and that's it. That's literally the only mention the characters get. But here, it's tied intimately into the story, and on top of that, she was a victim, but at the same time, they made it hit home in a very personal way. Easily one of my favorite stories. Book 4 is kind of a favorite of mine. I think book 4, every single story was very, very good. And yeah, that was the first 4 Fazbear's Frights novels. I've heard mixed reviews on these, and I can kind of see why. Some of them aren't that good. 1:35 a.m. was a huge letdown, kind of a slog. On the whole, I enjoyed it. I thought these are pretty good. I think the whole thing with the Stitch Wraith as a linking mechanism between volumes is really clever. I plan to pick more of these up. Leave a comment down below. Are there any stories in particular I should keep an eye out for? Are there any really bad ones? Go easy on spoilers. I know a couple things. I know Eleanor shows up again, but I don't really know in what capacity. So yeah, this was my little celebration of FNAF's 10-year anniversary, And I hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know. Would you guys want me to do more books in the future? Is that something that's hot in demand? And if you made it this far, now that we're like an hour and change into it, like, comment, subscribe. That would help me out a lot. And I'll see you guys next time.